What if the reason you feel restless is not because life is against you, but because you are still gripping something that was never meant to stay? What if the weight on your chest is not fate, not bad luck, not other people, but your own refusal to release? Think carefully. The person you keep checking your phone for, the outcome you keep trying to force, the past moment you replay before you sleep, the anger you defend as strength. You believe you are holding on to it because it matters. But what if it is the one holding your peace hostage? Buddhism teaches a truth that is quiet but life-changing. Suffering does not begin when something leaves. It begins when you refuse to let it leave. A closed fist cannot receive anything new. A crowded mind cannot feel calm. A heart tied to yesterday cannot live fully today. You say you want freedom. You say you want clarity. You say you want to feel light again. But freedom is not found in controlling more. It is found in loosening your grip. So before we go deeper, ask yourself one honest question. If you stopped holding so tightly, who would you become? Because today, you are not here to blame the world. You are here to see clearly. Let go or stay controlled. You choose. The moment peace becomes conditional, you lose power. Notice how often your mind quietly says, I will be okay when they finally reply. When I get that job, when my family understands me, when this problem disappears, when I fix what I ruined. At first it sounds normal, it sounds responsible, it even sounds hopeful. But look deeper. Hidden inside that sentence is a dangerous message. I cannot be at peace right now. And the moment you believe that, your power shifts away from you. Now your mood depends on someone else's message. Your confidence depends on an external result. Your calm depends on circumstances behaving the way you want. If they respond kindly, you feel light. If they ignore you, your chest feels heavy. If things go your way, you feel strong. If they don't, you collapse inside. Your inner world rises and falls like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. Life is always moving. People change their minds. Plans get delayed. Mistakes happen. Opportunities come and go. Nothing stays perfectly stable. So if your peace is built on things staying exactly how you want them, you will live in constant tension. Or this does not mean you should stop caring about your goals or relationships. Buddhism does not teach indifference. It teaches inner balance. You can work hard, love deeply, and try your best without making your peace dependent on the result. There is a big difference between preference and dependency. It is healthy to prefer success. It is healthy to prefer love. It is healthy to prefer understanding. But the moment you say, without this, I cannot be okay, you hand your emotional control to something fragile. Real strength is quieter than that. It says, I will try my best. I will care. I will act. But my inner stability does not disappear if things don't go my way. When you stop tying your peace to outcomes, something powerful happens. You still move forward. You still grow. You still aim high. But you are no longer shaking inside every time life shifts. Peace that depends on conditions is temporary. The peace that comes from within is steady. And when your peace is steady, nothing can easily control you. You are not attached to the thing, but to the feeling. It promised most of the time. You think you are holding on to a person, a goal, a relationship, a title, or a dream. But if you look carefully, what you are really holding is a feeling you believed that thing would give you. Maybe you thought that person would make you feel chosen. Maybe you believed that success would finally make you feel worthy. Maybe you were sure that relationship would make you feel safe. Maybe you thought that achievement would silence your self-doubt. The object is not what your heart is truly attached to. It is the emotional reward you imagined behind it. That is why letting go feels so painful. It is not just losing a person or an opportunity. It feels like losing the future version of yourself that you built in your mind. The version where you are confident, secure, admired, loved, respected. You are not mourning the thing itself. You are mourning the feeling you expected to experience through it. Buddhism teaches that this is how attachment forms. The mind creates a story. When I get this, I will finally feel complete. Then it repeats that story until it feels like truth. Slowly, the object becomes sacred. It becomes the gatekeeper of your happiness. But here is the quiet truth. No external thing contains your worth. No person carries your inner stability inside them. No job holds your peace in its hands. The mind projects meaning onto things. Then it forgets it was the one that created that meaning. Think about it. There are people who achieve everything and still feel empty. There are people who lose everything and still feel calm. This shows something powerful. The feeling does not live inside the object. It lives inside the mind. And when you believe, I need this to feel okay, you give that thing authority over your emotional state. If it stays, you feel good. If it leaves, you feel broken. Your sense of self becomes tied to something temporary, and everything outside you is temporary. This does not mean you should not love. It does not mean you should not dream. It simply means you must see clearly. Love the person, but do not make them the source of your identity. Work toward the goal, but do not make it the source of your worth. When you realize that the feeling you are chasing can be cultivated from within, through awareness, self-respect, patience, and understanding, you begin to loosen the grip. You stop begging the world to hand you a feeling you are capable of growing inside yourself. And when that shift happens, attachment weakens, because you no longer need the thing to feel whole. And the past controls you through unfinished emotions. Many people believe they are attached to the future, but in truth they are trapped in the past, not because the event still exists, but because the emotion was never fully processed. Maybe someone hurt you and never apologized. Maybe you failed at something that mattered deeply to you. Maybe you lost someone suddenly. Maybe you were embarrassed, rejected, betrayed, or misunderstood. The event is over. The moment has passed. You think of what you should have said. You think of what you should have said. You imagine confronting them. You imagine being stronger. You imagine being understood. You are not just remembering. You are mentally re-entering the moment. And every time you do, your body reacts as if it is happening again. Your chest tightens. Your stomach feels heavy. Your jaw clenches. The nervous system does not know the difference between memory and reality. So the past keeps living inside your present. This is how the past controls you. Not because it has power on its own, but because you keep feeding it attention and emotion. Buddhism teaches that suffering is not only caused by pain, it is caused by clinging. And clinging to the past is one of the strongest forms of attachment. You hold on to the hope that one day it will make sense. That one day it will feel fair. That one day it will change in your memory. But no amount of replaying will change what already happened. The mind believes that if it thinks about it enough, it will finally solve it. But some things are not solved by thinking. They are healed by acceptance. Acceptance does not mean what happened was right. It does not mean it did not hurt. It simply means you stop arguing with reality. You stop demanding a different version of history. You go. But what they really mean is, I go. But what they really mean is, I don't know how to allow it to be finished. Finishing something emotionally means saying, "It happened. I did not like it. It hurt me. But I will not let it keep shaping who I am becoming." The past only controls you when you keep living inside it. When you stop replaying it for justice, for validation, or for a different ending, something softens. The memory may remain, but it loses its emotional grip. You begin to live in the present again. And in the present, you are not the same person you were in that moment. You are wiser. You are more aware. You are no longer powerless. The event ended long ago. The only question is whether you are ready to let it end inside you, too. The addiction is not pleasure. It is relief. Most people believe they are addicted to pleasure. But if you look carefully, what you are really addicted to is relief. Relief from anxiety. Relief from loneliness. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from feeling not good enough. Think about the habits you keep repeating. Checking your phone again and again. Looking at their profile one more time. Overworking until you feel exhausted. Overthinking every small detail. Eating when you are not hungry. Scrolling when you feel empty. It does not always feel exciting. Sometimes it does not even feel good. But for a brief moment, it lowers the discomfort inside you. It gives you a small sense of control, a small sense of calm, and that small drop in tension becomes the hook. The mind learns something very quickly. When I feel uncomfortable, I must act immediately. I must escape this feeling. So the pattern repeats. You feel anxious. You check your phone. You feel insecure. You seek reassurance. You feel uncertain. You overanalyze. You feel lonely. You distract yourself. For a few minutes, the discomfort decreases, but it never truly disappears. It returns stronger. And because you never learned how to sit with it, the urge feels even more powerful next time. This is how the cycle forms. Buddhism teaches something simple but challenging. Discomfort is not your enemy. It is a temporary wave. But when you treat discomfort as something that must be removed instantly, you become its servant. Relief is not freedom. Relief is a pause that keeps the habit alive. Imagine someone who feels anxious about being ignored. Every time they feel that anxiety, they send another message. For a moment, they feel calmer because they did something. But if the reply still does not come, the anxiety grows stronger. So they act again. The problem is not the phone. The problem is the inability to sit with the feeling of uncertainty. True freedom begins when you can feel the urge without obeying it. When you feel the need to check, and you pause, or when you feel the need to prove yourself, and you breathe instead. When you feel the discomfort rising, and you allow it to exist without running. At first, it feels uncomfortable. Your mind will scream. It will tell you that something bad will happen if you do not act. But if you stay still, you will notice something powerful. The feeling rises, it peaks, and then it slowly falls on its own. You did not need to escape it. You did not need to control it. You just needed to witness it. The addiction weakens the moment you realize you are not chasing pleasure. You are escaping discomfort. And once you learn that discomfort will not destroy you, you stop being controlled by the need for constant relief. That is when the cage begins to open. Not because life became easier, but because you became stronger than the urge. Comparison is a quiet commitment to suffering. Comparison feels small at first. It feels like a quick thought. You see someone doing better than you, but you see someone getting more attention. You see someone moving faster in life, and your mind quietly says, "Why not me?" In that moment, something shifts inside you. Your focus leaves your own path and attaches itself to someone else's. Your mood changes. Your confidence drops. Your peace becomes unstable. Comparison does not scream, it whispers, but its effect is powerful. The real danger of comparison is not jealousy. It is the belief that your worth is measured against someone else's progress. When you compare, you are saying, "My value depends on where I stand next to others." That means if they rise, you feel smaller. If they succeed, you feel behind. If they shine, you feel dim. This is how comparison becomes a quiet commitment to suffering, because there will always be someone ahead of you in something. More successful, more attractive, more confident, more talented, more supported, more lucky. If your peace depends on being ahead, you will never rest. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins when you attach your identity to unstable measurements, and comparison is one of the most unstable measurements of all. You are not seeing the full picture of someone else's life. You see their highlights, you see their achievements. You rarely see their fears, their struggles, their silent battles. But your mind does not compare the full truth. It compares your behind-the-scenes reality to their visible success, and that comparison will always feel unfair. The deeper problem is this: when you compare, you abandon yourself. Instead of asking, "Am I growing?" you ask, "Am I ahead?" Instead of asking, "Am I learning?" you ask, "Am I better?" Instead of asking, "Am I aligned with my path?" you ask, "Am I winning?" Now your life becomes a race that never ends. Comparison also steals gratitude. It makes you blind to your own progress. It makes you overlook how far you have come. It makes you ignore your own strengths because you are too busy measuring yourself against someone else's timeline. Everyone moves at a different pace. Everyone starts from a different place. Everyone carries different responsibilities, different wounds, different opportunities. When you compare timelines, you ignore these realities. Buddhism brings your attention back to something steady: awareness of your own mind. A growth is not about being better than someone else. It is about being more aware than you were yesterday, more patient, more disciplined, more compassionate, more grounded. That kind of progress cannot be taken away by someone else's success. The moment you stop competing, something relaxes inside you. You stop looking sideways. You stop measuring constantly. You start focusing on what you can control: your effort, your choices, your character. Comparison promises motivation, but often it creates insecurity. Presence may feel quieter, but it creates stability. When you choose presence over comparison, you choose peace over pressure. And peace is far more powerful than being ahead. Identity clinging freezes your growth. One of the strongest attachments you carry is not to a person, not to a goal, not even to the past. It is to the idea of who you believe you are. Maybe you see yourself as the strong one who never breaks. Maybe you see yourself as the victim who is always misunderstood. Maybe you see yourself as the responsible one who must hold everything together. Maybe you see yourself as the one who always fails. Maybe you see yourself as the one who must prove their worth again and again. At first, these identities feel stable. They give you a sense of structure. They help you understand your story. They make the world feel organized, but slowly they become a prison. Because once you attach to an identity, you start defending it. You react in ways that protect the image. You avoid situations that challenge it. You repeat behaviors that confirm it. If you believe you are the strong one, you may hide your vulnerability even when you need support. If you believe you are the rejected one, You may expect abandonment even when someone cares. If you believe you are the failure, you may stop trying fully because your mind already decided the outcome. And this is how identity clinging freezes your growth. You stop responding to life as it is. You respond based on the role you are trying to protect. Buddhism teaches something radical. The self is not fixed. It is not a solid object. It is a changing process. Your thoughts change. Your emotions change. Your beliefs change. Your habits change. Even your personality shifts over time. Yet the mind wants certainty. So it builds a label and says, "This is who I am." The problem is not having a sense of self. The problem is believing it cannot change. When you cling to identity, you stop evolving. You resist feedback. You fear new experiences. You avoid growth because growth threatens the version of yourself you are attached to. Imagine trying to grow while holding a rigid image of who you must be. Every new lesson feels uncomfortable. Every mistake feels like proof that your identity is breaking. Every change feels dangerous. But growth requires flexibility. When you allow yourself to say, "Maybe I am not only this," something opens inside you. You realize you can be strong and vulnerable, confident and learning, healing and imperfect, capable and still growing. You are not limited to one story. Identity clinging also keeps you tied to the past. You may still be acting from an old version of yourself that no longer fits your present reality. Maybe you learned to be tough because you had to survive. Maybe you learned to stay small because it felt safer. Maybe you learned to overachieve to feel loved. But survival strategies are not meant to become permanent identities. When you see that clearly, you can thank the old version of yourself for protecting you, and then you can gently release it. You are allowed to outgrow your old self. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to shift your beliefs. You are allowed to step into a new way of being. At the moment you stop defending who you were, you create space for who you are becoming. And in that space, growth begins again. Trying to control others destroys your center. One of the fastest ways to lose your inner balance is to try to control someone else's mind. You want them to reply faster. You want them to understand you exactly. You want them to behave the way you think they should. You want them to choose you, stay the same, feel what you feel. At first, it feels like love. It feels like care. It feels like responsibility. But if you look honestly, beneath it is fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing control of the outcome. So you try harder, you explain more, you argue more, you prove more, you chase more, and slowly, without realizing it, you begin to leave your own center. Your mood now depends on their behavior. Your confidence depends on their approval. Your peace depends on their decisions. If they are warm, you feel calm. If they are distant, you feel unstable. If they agree, you relax. If they disagree, you feel attacked. This is how control destroys your center. You are no longer grounded in your own values and awareness. You are spinning around someone else's reactions. Buddhism teaches a simple truth. Every person has their own mind, their own karma, their own path. You cannot force clarity into someone. You cannot force maturity. You cannot force love. You cannot force alignment. The more you try, the more frustrated you become. Control also slowly erodes your self-respect. When you are desperate to shape someone's choices, you may lower your standards. You may ignore your boundaries. You may tolerate behavior that hurts you, just to keep the connection. You begin negotiating with your dignity, and that is the real loss. Trying to control someone often comes from the illusion that if you can just manage their behavior, you will feel safe. But safety built on controlling others is unstable. People change. They think differently. They grow at their own pace. Sometimes they walk away. If your emotional stability depends on keeping someone exactly as you want them, you will live in constant anxiety. Letting go of control, that does not mean you stop caring. It means you shift your focus back to what you actually can control. Your actions, your words, your boundaries, your reactions. You can express how you feel. When you can communicate clearly, you can choose whether to stay or leave. You can decide what behavior you accept, but you cannot force someone's heart to match yours. When you stop trying to control others, something powerful happens. You return to yourself. Your energy comes back. Your mind becomes calmer. You stop chasing and start observing. You realize that your center was never meant to live inside another person. Your center is within you. And when you stand firmly there, you do not need to control anyone to feel steady. Anger feels powerful, but it keeps you tied. Anger can feel powerful. When it rises inside you, it gives you energy, clarity, and a strong sense of being right. It can make you feel bold and in control, especially after you have been hurt or disrespected. In moments of anger, your body feels alive, your thoughts feel sharp, and your emotions feel justified. That is why anger is so tempting to hold on to. It feels like strength. But if you look more carefully, anger does not actually free you. It ties you to the very thing that hurt you. The more you replay the situation in your mind, the more connected you remain to the person or event. Even if they are no longer present in your life, they continue living in your thoughts. Your nervous system reacts as if the conflict is still happening. Your body tightens. Your heart rate shifts. Your mind keeps building arguments that no one is there to hear. This is how anger keeps you tied. You believe you are holding on to it for protection, but in reality, it is holding on to you. It keeps the story alive. It keeps the wound fresh. It keeps your energy focused on something that already happened. Instead of moving forward, part of you remains frozen in that moment. Buddhism does not deny that anger can arise naturally. It understands that pain creates strong reactions. However, it teaches that feeding anger strengthens suffering. Go back when you repeatedly justify it, replay it, and build your identity around it. Anger becomes part of who you think you are. You may start saying, "I will never forgive," or "I will never forget what they did." Over time, this becomes a fixed position, and your heart becomes heavy. Anger often feels like control, because it creates the illusion that you are standing strong against injustice. But true strength is not found in holding on to emotional fire. The true strength is found in knowing when to release it. Releasing anger does not mean saying the situation was acceptable. It does not mean pretending you were not hurt. It means you refuse to let that event continue shaping your present and future. When you hold anger for too long, it quietly affects other parts of your life. It can make you suspicious of new people. It can make you defensive in small disagreements. It can make you react strongly, even when the situation does not require it. Because the original event may be over, but the emotional pattern continues. Letting go of anger is not weakness. It is clarity. It is the understanding that carrying emotional fire burns you first. When you choose to release it, you create space for calm, for understanding, and for growth. You stop giving your past the power to decide how you feel today. Anger may rise, and that is human, but you do not have to build a home for it. You can notice it, understand it, and let it pass without allowing it to control your identity or your peace. The moment you stop feeding it with repeated thoughts and stories, it begins to lose its grip. That is when the rope loosens. And when the rope loosens, you are finally free to move forward without being tied to what once hurt you. Letting go is seeing clearly, not losing. Many people are afraid of letting go because they believe it means losing. Losing the person, losing the dream, losing the effort they invested, losing the version of life they imagined. It feels like defeat. It feels like giving up. It feels like admitting that something did not work. But letting go is not about losing. It is about seeing clearly. When you hold on tightly to something that is no longer aligned, your vision becomes distorted. You start justifying what hurts you. You start ignoring red flags. You start lowering your standards. You tell yourself stories to keep the attachment alive. You say, "Oh, maybe it will change." You say, "Maybe I am overreacting." You say, "Maybe if I try harder, it will work." Clinging clouds judgment. It makes you see what you want to see, not what is actually there. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment because attachment creates illusion. You do not see the situation as it is. You see it through fear, desire, and expectation. You confuse obsession with dedication. You confuse dependency with love. You confuse control with responsibility. Well, letting go removes the distortion. When you step back, when you loosen your grip, something becomes clear. You begin to see the person for who they truly are, not who you hoped they would become. You begin to see the situation without exaggerating its importance. You begin to see your own behavior without excuses. Clarity can feel painful at first, because clarity sometimes shows you that you are holding on to something that was not meant for you. It shows you that you were trying to force what did not naturally fit. It shows you that your fear of losing was stronger than your desire for peace. But clarity is not loss. It is awareness. When you let go, you are not saying the experience had no value. You are not erasing the memories. You are not pretending it did not matter. You are simply saying, "I see this for what it is, and I choose not to suffer for it anymore." That is strength. Letting go also protects your future. And when you cling to what is no longer right for you, you block space for what could be better aligned. Your hands are too full to receive anything new. Your energy is too invested in the past to move forward with clarity. Seeing clearly allows you to choose wisely. You stop reacting from fear. You stop acting from desperation. You stop chasing from insecurity. Instead, you begin to respond from awareness. In Buddhism, wisdom is the ability to see things as they truly are. Only letting go is an expression of that wisdom. It is not emotional weakness. It is emotional maturity. When you see clearly, you do not need to fight. You do not need to prove. You do not need to cling. You understand that everything is temporary. You understand that forcing permanence creates suffering. You understand that peace is more valuable than possession. And from that understanding, you loosen your grip, not because you lost, but because you finally saw the truth. But freedom lives in the pause. Freedom is not found in controlling everything around you. It is found in one small, almost invisible space inside you. The space between what happens and how you respond. Most of your suffering does not come from events themselves. It comes from automatic reactions. Someone says something and you react immediately. A message does not arrive, and your mind creates a story. A mistake happens, and you instantly attack yourself. There is no space, no breathing room. Just impulse, followed by action. That is where control takes over. The mind moves fast. It wants to react, defend, explain, chase, prove, fix, or escape. It tells you that you must do something right now. And because you believe that urgency, you obey. But Buddhism teaches that real power is not in fast reaction. It is in awareness. And awareness begins with a pause. The pause is small. Sometimes it is just one breath, 1 second of silence before you speak. Begin to see clearly. You notice the anger. You notice the fear. You notice the hurt. You notice the pain. You notice the tears. You notice the sadness. You notice the loneliness. You notice the emptiness. You notice the silence. 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 You notice the begin to see clearly. You notice the anger rising instead of becoming the anger. You notice the fear instead of letting it control your decision. You notice the craving instead of chasing it automatically. Without the pause, you are pulled by every emotion. With the pause, you choose. When someone criticizes you, the instant when someone criticizes you, the instant reaction might be defensiveness. You want to interrupt, justify, or attack back. But if you pause, even for a few seconds, something shifts. You might still respond, but you respond from clarity. not from wounded pride. And when you feel the urge to check your phone again and again, the impulse feels strong. But if you pause and simply observe the discomfort without acting on it, you realize something important. The urge rises, peaks, and slowly fades. You did not need to obey it. The pause gives you proof that you are not powerless. Most people live without this space. They are pushed and pulled by emotions all day long. Anger pushes them, fear pulls them, desire pushes them, insecurity pulls them. Their inner world feels chaotic because there is no space between stimulus and reaction. But when you practice pausing, you reclaim control. You begin to realize that freedom is not about changing the world outside you. It is about not being dragged by every wave inside you. The pause also builds self-respect. When you do not react instantly, you show yourself that you are capable of restraint, that you are capable of wisdom, that you are not a prisoner of impulse. Over time, this small habit changes your entire life. Arguments become calmer, decisions become wiser, emotions become less overwhelming. You feel steadier because you are no longer reacting blindly. Freedom does not require perfect circumstances. It requires awareness, and awareness lives in the pause. The next time you feel the urge to react, to chase, to prove, to escape, remember that you have a choice. Even one breath can return you to your center. In that single breath, control weakens, and you step back into your power. Look honestly at your life now. Not at the world, not at other people, not at what went wrong. Look at what you are still holding. What thought do you keep replaying? What outcome are you still trying to force? What person are you trying to control in your mind? What version of yourself are you afraid to outgrow? Because whatever you refuse to release is shaping you. It is deciding your mood. It is influencing your reactions. It is quietly directing your choices. Buddhism does not tell you to stop caring. It tells you to stop clinging. It does not ask you to become cold. It asks you to become clear. When you stop making your peace conditional, you become steady. When you stop chasing feelings through people and outcomes, you become whole. When you stop living inside unfinished emotions, you return to the present. When you stop feeding anger, you reclaim your energy. When you pause before reacting, you rediscover your power. Freedom is not dramatic. It is subtle. It is the quiet decision to loosen your grip. You may not control the world. You may not control other people. You may not control the past. But you can control whether you keep holding on. So tonight, ask yourself one simple question. Is what I am holding giving me strength? Or is it controlling me? Let go, or stay controlled. You choose.